So some of our fastest sellers for our reselling business were things that we nearly didn't buy. And some of our more confident buys are things that are still sitting a year later. So welcome back to a new video. My name is Gemma and me and my fiance James run a reselling business where we sell luxury and vintage items called House of Jamz. And this video is all about what actually sold in our reselling business versus what we thought we would be able to sell. So very interesting, and we were actually coming up to the end of our first year in reselling, so thought that would be a good time to kind of reflect on our first year in business together. So a little disclaimer before I kind of get started is that this is totally based on our experience, and we are based in the UK, we're based in Edinburgh. I do feel like where you're based and where you sell sometimes has changes this quite a lot for you. So this is completely based on us. We are not experts obviously, but it is something that is going to really inform what we choose to buy in the future, and just based on what we've managed to observe and see how things have panned out this year. So just a little disclaimer there. This is obviously what works for us and what we plan to use going forward, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to work for everybody who is reselling. So just wanted to mention that. So the first kind of items that we were really surprised that didn't sell as well, so we're going to talk about the things that maybe weren't great sellers, was luxury high-end pieces. So we bought quite a lot of items when we did our last kind of buying new stock. We bought quite a few Chanel wallets and Chanel pieces and things as well, like Balenciaga, things like that. Obviously both of us, I was responsible for a lot of the Chanel pieces because again, I personally like Chanel. I think they're a really good quality brand, and especially vintage Chanel, love it. However, these pieces have taken so long to shift, and they've only sold literally last week. And right now, as you can see from the Christmas tree, it's Christmas, it's between Christmas and New Year. And I actually think that's the only reason they sold. It's because people were looking for gifts. I do not have confidence at all that they would sell really well at any time, in anywhere else in the year. So they've actually sat for the longest time. Some of the reasons why I think this is because they are higher end items. They are a little bit pricier, so obviously people are going to take a bit longer to make that decision to buy them. We had a lot of people, favouriting them, a lot of people asking questions and things, but not that many people actually making that, decision to buy. So definitely, thought they would sell because they were a really good brand. Obviously, we personally like them, but that doesn't mean that customers do. I do sometimes think as well, when people hear Chanel, it almost scares them off a little bit because they think it's going to be expensive, or maybe if they think the price is maybe not quite high enough, maybe think it's fake. I don't know. Obviously none of the items that we sell are fake, but so definitely something that I was quite surprised about there. So the next type of item that we were very surprised didn't sell as well, and this is way back at the beginning of our reselling journey, so probably about a year ago, nearly a year ago now, was vintage sportswear. So we bought initially, before we started going down the luxury side, we bought a lot of vintage Champion, Nike, Adidas, all that kind of stuff. When you think of vintage stores, that is what a lot of them are selling. Everybody's selling that. We kind of thought, right, obviously there's a demand for it. We'll buy, sweatshirts, hoodies, t-shirts, all that kind of stuff, and we'll be able to hopefully shift that quick. Again, the reality is that because a lot of people are selling that, that is who you're competing with. So there was just, I felt like there was a bit too much competition there, and so we were almost like having to either drive our prices quite low or do things to get more eyes on our items. Our more unique items, like ones that were maybe more of a unique colour, colourway and things like that, they sold, but we are still left with, like, I want to say 4 navy blue Nike vintage hoodies that are really not that interesting, even if they're vintage, and we're still sat with them. And I doubt we're going to sell them anytime soon. So another type of item that we thought would sell better than it actually did was things that were a little bit more unique or niche. So I've got a very particular example here. So I bought a few vintage denim jackets over the summer, and I tie-dyed them. And to me, They were beautiful. You can, if you do like tie-dye, you know, go and have a look in our store. I do still think they're really, really lovely. We managed to sell one on Etsy, and then I actually sold one just last week, which I was really surprised at, because it's more of a, I would always think it's more of a summer piece, but you know, whatever. However, it is probably over 6 months now since we put them up, and we're left with, I think, still 3, and I think I made 5. So it's taken this long to sell 2. I don't know if it's maybe partly that they're too niche, they're too kind of unique for where we sell them. Don't know if it's better to sell that type of thing on Etsy, because that's kind of where we sold the first one, but we don't really sell on Etsy. We talk about that in one of our other videos. So yeah, so definitely things that were a bit too niche, a little bit too unique, is probably something that we thought would sell because they were unique, they're eye-catching, but actually turned out to be a little bit of a flop. So I think the reason why this was a bit of a mistake is because when you've got things that are a bit unique and a little bit niche, it's actually harder for buyers to visualise themselves using it or wearing it. So if you do want to go down that route of selling those types of things, maybe in your photographs, model it, you know, to show an example of it with an outfit or something, so then it makes it easier for buyers to imagine themselves wearing it. So that's the only kind of tip I would say around that. So another type of item that we thought would sell better than it actually did was items that had flaws that we felt we could fix. So we had a few items that we thought, you know, were really unique, really special. They were obviously quite cheap to buy because they had a flaw, whether it was a mark on it or a little bit of wear or something. And these were all things that I felt like we could fix. A couple of things I did fix, like if it was sewing. However, a couple of things, like for example, we had this really, really nice Reebok windbreaker jacket, but it had a couple of marks like on the cuffs, and it was on a white jacket, so it was really noticeable. Managed to get most of the marks off, but there were still a few marks, and it just got to the point where I just had to kind of give up. It just wasn't worth the time investment. Did manage to sell that though, but pretty much just sold it at the price that we bought it for, so didn't really make much money on it. So yeah, so that was another thing that we kind of you know, made a little bit of a mistake with, but we probably won't be doing much of that in the future. So now that we've spoken about some of the things that we thought would sell but didn't, we're actually now, I want to tell you about some of the things that sold better than what we expected. So the first thing that I wanted to mention was accessories. So even though we've done a little bit of research and James has said to me, oh, we should be doing wallets, things like that. I don't know why, but I was always a bit sceptical about getting things like wallets, purses, stuff like that. I don't know why. I just thought, will that sell, that stuff? I just wasn't convinced. However, those kinds of items sell so well, better than what I expected. And I suppose it's because wallets, purses, bags, that kind of stuff, you can sell it all year round. It's not seasonal. And a lot of the stuff, especially wallets, are unisex. So you're not just directing it at one, you know, type of person. It kind of covers a lot of people. And obviously you've not just got buying for themselves, but buying for gifts. So it covers a lot of buying options. So definitely accessories is something that sold, you know, a lot better than what I expected. Another positive with selling accessories as well is there's not really a risk of the size being wrong. So that's one of the things that we found when selling clothing. Obviously, if it's an extra large or a large or whatever, it's only catering to the people that actually want or wear that size, whereas an accessory can fit everybody. There's not really a limit on who can buy it because of sizing. So definitely accessories is a great option because it just casts a wider net for the possibility of customers, and I think that is probably the direction that we're going to go from now on. So another type of item that sold a lot better than what I expected, kind of down the same route as accessories, is vintage luxury bags. So this is more handbags, so things like Coach handbags, Gucci, Dior, things like that. Those have sold really well, and again, it's the same kind of thing, you know, it's year round, it's not seasonal, it can appeal to, you know, people that wear all different sizes, just like a wider, you know, net is cast, as I said, for customers. And then as well, even better, that it's vintage, so people are able to buy something that's a little bit unique, a little bit different, because it's vintage, but it's still a brand that they trust. So the likes of, as I said, Gucci or Dior or whatever. So they're familiar with the brand, they trust it, but it's something a little bit unique because it's vintage, so it still has that kind of specialness feeling to it. So definitely something that sold, a lot better than what I was expecting. So another area that sold a lot better than what I expected was unbranded vintage stuff. So a lot of the stuff that we have is branded, whether it's a sportswear brand like Nike or Adidas, or more luxury stuff like Gucci or Chanel. But we did have a few pieces thrown in there that were not branded, or brands that we'd never really heard of. So one example which I can think of was, it was back when we were selling clothing, it was a sweatshirt, and it actually had this embroidered animal on the front. I think it was like a raccoon or something. It was like an American brand. You could tell it was an American vintage sweatshirt, really thick quality, embroidered. And that sold so quickly. And I think we sold it for, I want to say £40 or something, which was more than what we were selling the branded stuff for. Like, that is the price that we got for it. And then the same with some handbags. That we sold some vintage handbags that didn't have any brand on them at all, but they were vintage. They were really nice materials, really beautiful. You could tell they were vintage. They had a really nice vintage vibe to them, and those sold so quickly. And again, we didn't have to haggle much with prices. So I think with those kind of items, people are definitely drawn to things that maybe don't have a label, but they definitely have that vintage vibe that, you can tell just by looking at it that it's definitely a vintage piece. So another type of item that sold much better than what we thought was smaller sizes but in certain brands. So we found that with a lot of other brands that we were selling and items, that the bigger sizes like medium, large, extra large and so on were the better sizes to get, because that's what more people were looking for, and that sizes small, extra small were trickier to sell. So quite surprising that with certain brands, so the likes of Stone Island and CP Company, those smaller sizes, like extra small, small and medium, up to medium, those sizes actually sell really well. So if you're selling those brands, definitely get the smaller sizes. It's obviously people that wear those sizes that buy those brands. There was a really strong demand for all the pieces that we got. Like, we've actually sold a couple of jumpers and then like a corduroy shirt, and everything that was in those brands, in those sizes, sold really quickly, and again, did not have to, be talked down on price at all. Like, people actually just paid the price that we listed it at. So definitely a high demand for those kind of items. So some of our biggest surprises that we've had when, selling and sort of looking back at what sold versus what hasn't, is lower priced stuff doesn't always sell well. So even though, it's decent quality and things like that, just because you're pricing it at a lower price or maybe undercutting other people doesn't make, guarantee that it's going to sell. Also, higher priced items did eventually sell. So we managed to sell a Louis Vuitton like duffel bag. That actually was a really, really good buy, and the person was really happy with it. So it did sell, but it's just sort of being patient to make sure that you're going to get the right kind of the right buyer. Simpler, sort of more statement pieces and sort of more, statement colours, so like black, brown, neutrals and things like that, those obviously do sell. I mean, I wouldn't say that was really a big surprise, but I don't know why, but I always kind of thought that maybe something that was a bit more unique would sell better. Not the case at all. Definitely go for the more kind of wearable colours. So thinking about what sold this year versus what hasn't has definitely made us sort of a bit more conscious when we're coming to buying new stock. So I think in the future, we're definitely going to be thinking about the quality of items. I mean, we didn't really go for cheaper, sort of less quality items anyway, but yeah, definitely thinking about the quality. Good quality items definitely sold a lot quicker. Definitely thinking about focusing more on accessories. So I can't really see us buying much more clothing, to be quite honest with you. I think we're definitely going to go down, the accessories route. And I think this is probably the trickiest sort of thing that we're going to have to do moving forward, is be willing to walk away from something. So we definitely have bought things that maybe we liked or ticked a few of the boxes of what we're looking for, but some of those things have, again, I've just sat, we've not sold them yet, or it's taken a while for them to sell. And I definitely think that in the future, we are going to be better at walking away from things and being like, right, that doesn't tick enough boxes. it's not going to sell quick enough for us, even though we like it, even though it's a good piece, but you know, it ticks some of these boxes, but actually overall it's not a good buy. So I do think we are going to be a lot better at that in the future when we come to buy new stock. So I'd love to hear if you are a fellow reseller, or if you run a small business, or even if you make things and run a small business. I'd love to hear, you know, your sort of, I suppose, same kind of thing, what you thought would sell versus what you didn't. What's the biggest surprises you've had with maybe reselling things? Make sure and comment below and let me know. So if you found this video interesting or useful, make sure and subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any future videos, and I'll see you in our next one. Bye!